What if silence said more than words ever could? The rain tapped gently against the window, filling the room with a soft, rhythmic hum. Emily lay on her side, her body still, her breathing slow and even, the perfect imitation of sleep. But inside, her heart was wide awake. Every small sound, every movement he made echoed in her chest like thunder. Ethan sat at the edge of the bed, his shoulders bent forward, his fingers interlocked, his head bowed as if he carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. She wanted to open her eyes. She wanted to ask him what he was thinking, why he hadn't touched her hand in days, why their laughter had disappeared so quietly, but she couldn't. Pride and fear held her down like a blanket she couldn't throw off. He sighed, long and low, the kind of sigh that comes from someone who's tried too hard for too long. The sound almost broke her. She wanted to tell him she heard it, that it hurt her too. But she stayed still. Em, he whispered softly. Her name, so fragile, so full of everything they used to be. She didn't move. His voice trembled a little as he continued. I don't know how to stay if you don't want me to. Her breath caught. What did that mean? Was he giving up? Did he think she didn't love him anymore? Inside, her mind screamed to stop him, to turn around and say something, anything. But she couldn't, not now. If she spoke, the tears would come, and she didn't want him to see her weak again. Not tonight. He stood up slowly, walked to the dresser and picked up the photo frame, the one from their first trip to Seattle. They were smiling in that photo, wind in their hair, coffee in their hands. It was the happiest they'd ever been. He looked at it for a long moment, then set it down again. The clock ticked louder in the silence. She heard him take a deep breath, his steps moving toward the door. Good night, Em, he said quietly. Her heart twisted at how gentle his voice sounded, almost like he was saying goodbye. The door clicked softly behind him, and for the first time that night, Emily opened her eyes. Tears welled up before she could stop them. One slipped down her cheek, then another. She pressed her lips together to stop the sob that threatened to escape. The pillow beneath her felt cold, damp with her silent grief. She sat up and looked around the room. Everything was familiar. His jacket on the chair, the faint smell of his cologne, the half-empty glass of water on his side of the nightstand. But suddenly it all felt distant, like he was already gone, and only his shadow remained. Her eyes landed on the photo he had touched. She reached for it, her fingers trembling. The glass was smudged where his thumb had been. She held it close to her chest and whispered into the quiet. I still want you, Ethan. I always have. But her words had nowhere to go. They stayed trapped inside 4 walls that had heard too much silence and too few truths. How did love turn into fear without anyone noticing? She leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts ran wild. It hadn't always been this way. There was a time when he would have pulled her close at the first sign of distance, when they would talk until 3 a.m., laughing at things that didn't even make sense. But lately their conversations had become short, safe, predictable. How was your day? Good. Dinner's ready. Okay. And that was it. She thought back to that one night, the last time they really talked. She had told him about her fear of losing him, how she felt invisible sometimes. He had held her hand, kissed her forehead, and promised he wasn't going anywhere. She believed him then, but promises fade when actions stop matching them. Now, all she could think about was his whisper, I don't know how to stay if you don't want me to. It replayed over and over in her head like a broken record. Why did he think she didn't want him? Was she that distant, or was he just tired of trying? The thought made her stomach twist. She remembered the way he used to look at her, like she was the only person in the world. But lately his eyes were always somewhere else. On his phone, on his work, anywhere but her. Maybe that's why she started pretending to sleep, to hear what he said when he thought she couldn't, to understand the words he couldn't say to her face. But now, hearing them hurt more than silence ever could. The rain grew heavier outside, drumming against the glass like a warning. The night felt colder. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, her fingers brushing the empty space beside her. She could still feel the warmth where he had been sitting moments ago. It was fading fast. She wanted to chase it, to run after him, to pull him back into bed and say, "I'm sorry. I'm just scared." But her body wouldn't move. Her mind wouldn't let her. Instead, she sat there, frozen in the dim light, her tears falling soundlessly. What if pretending to be strong is the very thing that breaks you? Time passed slowly after that. Minutes felt like hours. She checked the clock. 1:47 a.m. The house was quiet except for the sound of the storm and the occasional creak of the old wooden floor. She thought about going to him, just walking into the living room and saying everything she'd been holding back. But what if he didn't want to listen? What if he'd already made up his mind? Her thoughts spun faster than she could stop them. What if this was it, the night everything ended? Not with a fight, not with anger, but with silence. That scared her more than anything. She stood up finally, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor. She opened the bedroom door slowly, her heart pounding. The light from the hallway was still on. Maybe he was there, sitting on the couch, waiting for her to come. But the living room was empty. His keys were gone. The car wasn't in the driveway. He had left. Her breath caught in her throat. She stepped outside onto the porch, the rain soaking her instantly. She looked down the street, hoping to see his headlights, to hear the sound of his engine coming back. But there was nothing, just the soft hum of rain and the distant glow of streetlights. Her chest ached as she whispered his name, but her voice was swallowed by the storm. She sank onto the step, wrapping her arms around herself. The cold bit at her skin, but she didn't care. The real chill was inside her. She had wanted to protect her heart by staying silent. Now it felt like she'd buried it alive. Can a single night change everything? By the time she went back inside, the clock read 3:10 a.m. The house felt emptier than ever. His absence was everywhere. In the half-drunk coffee on the counter, the jacket missing from the hook, the silence that followed her like a shadow. She walked back into the bedroom, sat on his side of the bed and looked at the photo again. Her fingers traced the outline of his face. She wanted to memorize every detail before it hurt too much to look. Her mind replayed the night, the sound of his whisper, the click of the door, the silence after. She wished she could go back, just 5 minutes, to when he was still sitting there, to when she could have turned and said, "Don't go." But time doesn't wait for realization. It just moves forward, leaving people behind in the moments they were too afraid to fix. She finally lay down again, pulling the blanket tight around her. Her pillow was still damp, her heartbeat still racing. She closed her eyes, but not to pretend this time, only to stop the flood of memories from breaking her apart. The rain began to fade, replaced by a soft quiet that filled the air like a sigh. She could almost hear his voice again. "Good night, Em," she whispered into the darkness. "Good night, Ethan." But the words trembled, because deep down, she knew this wasn't just good night. It was something closer to goodbye. And as the dawn crept in through the window, painting faint gold across the empty bed, Emily realized something that made her chest tighten. This was the first morning she'd have to face alone. The silence that had once been comforting now felt endless. And though the night was over, the real storm, the one inside her, was only just beginning. The morning sun spilled through the kitchen window like nothing had happened. The rain from the night before had washed the world clean, but inside the house, everything still felt heavy, quiet, slow, careful. Emily stood by the counter, her fingers wrapped around a warm coffee mug. Across from her, Ethan was flipping pancakes, acting like the night hadn't cracked something between them. His movements were calm, but too deliberate, like every action was a performance. She watched him for a moment, studying the way he kept his eyes on the pan instead of her. There was a time when he'd tease her about burning toast, when they'd laugh over spilled coffee and half-cooked breakfasts. But today, there was only silence and the faint sound of the spatula tapping the skillet. He turned slightly, offering her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sleep well?" "Yeah," she lied, forcing a small nod. The lie hung in the air like a curtain between them. He didn't press further, and she didn't explain. Both of them were too tired to break the fragile peace. They sat at the table, eating in silence. The smell of coffee filled the room, but even that familiar comfort felt strange now. Emily kept her eyes on her plate, but she could feel him watching her every few seconds, the same way someone watches something they're already losing. When she reached for the butter knife, their fingers brushed. Just a brief touch, but it was enough to send a small shock through her, a reminder of what used to be natural, effortless. She froze for a heartbeat, so did he. Then he pulled his hand back, clearing his throat, pretending to be focused on his food again. She swallowed hard. "The pancakes are good," she said softly. "Thanks," he replied, his voice quiet. Then after a pause, "You seemed quiet last night." Her pulse quickened. He remembered. Of course he did. "I was just tired," she answered, the same excuse she always used. He nodded slowly. Right. The silence that followed was too long, too sharp. It pressed on her chest until she had to stand just to breathe. She gathered the plates, moved to the sink, and turned on the water, just to fill the room with some sound, any sound. Behind her, Ethan's chair scraped against the floor. She didn't turn around. He walked toward the hallway, stopped for a second like he wanted to say something, then left without another word. The door clicked. The same sound as last night. She turned off the water, her hands trembling slightly. When she glanced back at the table, she saw something folded beneath her coffee cup, a small note, plain white, written in his handwriting. Her heart jumped as she unfolded it. "I wish you'd talk to me like you used to." The words hit her harder than she expected. They were simple but heavy. Real. She sat down slowly, staring at the paper, her throat tight. She could almost hear him saying it, the same soft tone he used when he was afraid to lose her. Can love survive if both people stop showing up to it? For the rest of the day, she couldn't focus. The note replayed in her mind like a song stuck on repeat. She tried to distract herself, cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, even rearranged books that didn't need rearranging. But no matter what she did, she kept glancing at the clock, waiting for the sound of his car pulling back into the driveway. When he finally came home that evening, it was almost dark. The headlights flashed across the curtains, and her heart skipped. She stood in the hallway, hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. He walked in, holding his jacket loosely in one hand. "Hey," he said, offering a small smile. "Hey," she replied. He looked tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that comes from carrying too much inside. She wanted to say something about the note, about how she did want to talk, but the words got tangled on her tongue. They ate dinner quietly again. Small talk, safe topics, the weather, the new movie on Netflix, his work emails, nothing that mattered. Every sentence felt like a missed chance. After dinner, he went to the couch, scrolling through his phone. She sat beside him, pretending to watch the TV. A comedy show played in the background, but neither of them laughed. She looked at him from the corner of her eye. His profile was lit by the glow of the screen, familiar and distant all at once. She wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, to tell him she still remembered how they started, how she still loved him despite the silence. But something inside her hesitated. What if he didn't feel the same anymore? What if the note wasn't a plea, but a goodbye disguised as one? The thought scared her so much that she looked away before he noticed the tears welling up. Sometimes love doesn't end in one moment. It fades in quiet hours. Days passed in slow motion. They still did everything together. Dinner, laundry, errands. But it all felt mechanical. The smiles were practiced. The laughter, rare. One night, while folding clothes in the living room, Emily found an old sweater of his, the navy one she'd always stolen because it smelled like him. She held it close, closing her eyes for a moment. The fabric still carried traces of that scent, coffee, cedar, and a hint of cologne. It made her ache inside. Ethan walked in just then, holding his laptop. He stopped when he saw her, something flickering across his face. Nostalgia, maybe pain. "You still wear that thing?" he asked gently. She smiled faintly. "It's warm," he nodded. "Yeah, it's a good one." The air between them softened for a second, like a small window had opened. She wanted to take that moment, stretch it, turn it into something real. But before she could speak, his phone buzzed. A message. He glanced at it, smiled slightly, and walked away to take the call. The window closed. She stood there, holding the sweater, feeling foolish for thinking they could still fix this. When he returned, she was sitting on the couch, pretending to scroll through her phone. He didn't notice her red eyes. He just sat down, sighed, and turned the TV on. She leaned back against the cushions, staring at the ceiling. The note he had written was still folded in her pocket. She ran her fingers over it, whispering under her breath, "I wish you'd listen like you used to." Sometimes, love leaves before anyone says goodbye. The next morning, Ethan left early for work. The house felt emptier than usual. Emily sat by the window with her coffee, watching the sunlight stretch across the floor. The air smelled like rain again. She opened her phone, scrolled through their old photos, their first anniversary, the road trip to Oregon, the night they danced in the kitchen with the music too loud. Each picture felt like a different version of them. Younger, happier, fearless. Somewhere between the photos and the silence, she realized something painful. She hadn't stopped loving him. She had just stopped showing it. That night, she decided she'd tell him. No walls, no pretending, just honesty. She rehearsed the words in her head over and over. "I don't want us to fade. I still love you." But when he came home, he seemed distracted again. His voice was polite, his smile distant. Dinner was quiet. She tried to speak twice, but each time he interrupted with something small. A phone notification, a work story, a "did you hear about?" Her courage began to slip away. Later, as they went to bed, she turned toward him. He was already lying down, eyes closed, the faint rhythm of his breathing filling the room. She hesitated. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe she'd tell him tomorrow. Then, in the dark, she heard him whisper something she almost missed. "Maybe we're just pretending at this point." Her heart stopped. She lay frozen, staring at him through the shadows. He wasn't asleep. He was awake and hurting in the same silence that had trapped them both. Her throat tightened. She wanted to reach out, to tell him he was wrong, that she wasn't pretending. But once again she stayed still. He turned his back to her. The room felt colder, and as she lay there, eyes open in the dark, she realized something devastating. Love doesn't disappear all at once. It fades in the spaces where words should have been. Her pillow was damp again before she even noticed she was crying. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and as lightning flashed against the window, Emily whispered into the dark, "I wish you knew I was never pretending." But like every night before, her words came too late. The house had never felt quieter. The laughter, the warmth, the small talks, all gone, replaced by the sound of dishes clinking and footsteps echoing across the hardwood floor. Emily moved through the rooms like a ghost, carrying on with her routine, pretending everything was fine. But deep down, she knew something between her and Ethan had cracked. Not loudly, not suddenly, but slowly, like glass under pressure. They still shared the same roof, the same meals, even the same bed. Yet somehow they lived in different worlds now. Every night, when they lay side by side, the distance between them felt wider than ever. He would turn his back to her, scrolling through his phone until he fell asleep. She would stare at the ceiling, tracing invisible lines of memory, where love used to live, where his hand used to rest. One evening, while he was at work, she sat by the window, her phone in her hand. She opened their old photos, trips, birthdays, inside jokes only they understood. Each image hurt more than the last. They looked like strangers now, those two people smiling in the pictures. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she wiped them quickly. She didn't want to cry again. She had done enough of that. That night, when Ethan came home, she was lying on the bed, eyes closed. Pretending to be asleep again. She didn't plan it, but something inside her wanted to know what he did when he thought she wasn't watching. Maybe she needed to know if he still cared. He walked in quietly, the soft creak of the door giving him away. For a moment, he just stood there. She could feel his presence, heavy, uncertain. She could hear his breathing, uneven, tired. Minutes passed. He didn't move. Then finally he spoke, barely above a whisper. "I think she stopped loving me." Her heart froze. The words cut through the silence like a knife. She wanted to shout, "No, I haven't," but her throat wouldn't move. She stayed still, her heartbeat pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. He sighed, the kind of sigh that carried months of confusion and heartbreak. Then she felt his fingers touch her hair, gentle, almost trembling. "I just wish I knew what I did wrong," he said softly, his voice breaking on the last word. Tears slipped down her face silently. She bit her lip to stop herself from making a sound. She wanted to hold his hand, to tell him everything, that she loved him, that she was scared, that she didn't know how to fix what was broken. But pride held her hostage again. He stayed there a moment longer, then turned away. She heard him walk out of the room, his footsteps slow and heavy. When the door closed, Emily finally let out a sob she had been holding for weeks. The sound filled the empty room, raw and real. What if silence feels safer than the truth? The next morning, they acted as if nothing had happened. Ethan greeted her with the same polite, "Morning," and she smiled like she hadn't heard him confess his doubts in the dark. They sat across from each other at breakfast, stirring coffee that had already gone cold. She wanted to say something, anything. Maybe start with, "Ethan," about last night. But when she looked up, he was already glancing at his phone, lost in work emails. So she stayed quiet again. The hours drifted by. She worked from home, typing words that didn't matter. Every now and then, she'd glance at her phone, half hoping he'd text her first. But he didn't. By evening, she felt restless. The walls of the house seemed to be closing in. She grabbed her coat and went for a walk, just to clear her head. The cold air hit her face, sharp and refreshing. The town looked peaceful, couples walking hand in hand, laughing, talking. Every sound of joy made her chest ache. She ended up at the small cafe where she and Ethan used to go every Sunday morning. The owner, a kind old man, recognized her immediately. "Haven't seen you two in a while," he said warmly. She smiled faintly. "Yeah, we've been busy." He nodded, unaware of the truth buried in her voice. She ordered their usual drinks, one caramel latte, one black coffee, and sat by the window. When the drinks arrived, she looked at both cups sitting side by side and felt the tears rise again. She left one untouched. Back home, the lights were off except for the dim glow from the living room. Ethan was sitting on the couch staring blankly at the TV. "You went out?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yeah, just for some air," she replied quietly. He nodded but didn't ask where. She hesitated, then placed the cup of coffee on the table in front of him. "Got this for you." He looked at it, then at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You remembered how I like it." "I always remember," she said softly. For a moment it felt like something shifted. His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close enough. They both reached for the same cup at the same time, their hands brushing again. This time, neither pulled away immediately, but before the silence could turn warm, his phone buzzed. The moment shattered. He looked at the screen, frowned, then stood up. "I need to take this." She watched him walk into the other room, the door half closed behind him. His voice was low, serious, unfamiliar. She couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. The distance between them had spoken louder than any call ever could. She sat there, staring at the untouched cup, the steam fading slowly, just like their love. What hurts more, losing someone, or realizing they're already gone? Later that night, Ethan returned to the bedroom, quiet as ever. He changed into a fresh t-shirt, turned off the light, and lay down beside her. Neither of them spoke. Emily stared into the dark, replaying the cafe scene in her head. The note, the whispers, the coffee cup. Every small thing that could have been a start, but never was. She turned slightly toward him, her hand just inches away from his. Her mind screamed to reach out, to bridge that impossible gap, but she froze again. He shifted slightly, not realizing she was watching him. The faint light from the window outlined his face, tired, sad, lost. She had memorized that face years ago, but tonight, it felt like she was looking at a stranger wearing the skin of someone she once knew. She bit her lip to hold back another wave of tears. She was tired of crying, tired of pretending, tired of hoping that silence could fix what words never did. Finally, she whispered, barely audible, "Ethan, do you still love me?" No answer. For a moment, she thought he had fallen asleep. But then, after a long pause, he said softly, "I don't know anymore." The air in the room turned heavy. Her chest tightened as if someone had taken all the oxygen away. She wanted to scream, "Then let me remind you," but her voice failed her again. She turned her back to him, her tears falling freely now, soaking the pillow. The quiet between them had finally spoken the truth neither dared to face. Sometimes, goodbyes begin in silence long before the words are said. The next day, the house felt different. Still quiet, but this time emptier. Ethan was distant, polite, calm, detached. He talked about work, bills, and small plans for the week, but the warmth in his tone was gone. Emily tried to keep up the act, to smile where she should, to laugh when it seemed right. But inside, she felt herself fading too. That evening, she cooked dinner, his favorite meal. When he came home, he looked surprised. "What's all this?" "Just thought we could eat together," she said with a small smile. They sat across from each other, eating quietly. For a brief moment, it almost felt normal. The candles flickered, the food smelled good, and for the first time in weeks, she saw him smile, a real one. She felt hope rise inside her. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe they could start again. After dinner, he helped her clean up, humming softly to himself. She looked at him, really looked. And for a moment, she saw the man she fell in love with. When they finished, she said softly, "Ethan, can we talk?" He hesitated, drying his hands with a towel. "About what?" "About us," she said. He froze, his eyes meeting hers. "Now?" "Yes, please." He took a deep breath, nodded slightly, and sat down. For a second, neither of them spoke. She felt her heart beating too fast. "Ethan," she began, "I know I've been distant. I know I've hurt you by not saying how I feel, but I never stopped loving you. Her words caught when she saw the look on his face. Not anger, not surprise. Just sadness. "Emily," he said softly, "I wish you'd said that sooner." Her chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He looked down, twisting his wedding band slowly around his finger. "Because I don't know if I can keep pretending anymore." Her stomach dropped. The room spun for a second. Before she could speak, he stood up. "I'm going for a drive," he said quietly. She reached out, her voice trembling. "Ethan, wait." But the front door closed before she could finish. The sound of his car pulling away echoed through the night. She stood there, frozen, staring at the door like it might open again. But it didn't. The only thing left was the faint smell of candle wax and the echo of his last words. "I wish you'd said that sooner." Emily sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. The candles flickered out one by one, leaving her in the dark, and for the first time, she realized the truth she'd been avoiding all along. Maybe love doesn't end with a fight. Maybe it ends when someone finally stops pretending. The sun was just beginning to rise when Emily woke up. The light spilling through the curtains looked softer than usual, calmer, but something about it felt wrong. She turned toward the other side of the bed, reaching out instinctively. The sheets were cold. Ethan's pillow was untouched, the blanket folded neatly. Her heart sank. She sat up slowly, her chest tightening with a strange, heavy feeling. She called out his name once softly. "Ethan?" No answer. She got up, walked through the hallway. The house was too quiet. No sound of the coffee maker, no shoes by the door, no jacket on the chair. Her stomach dropped when she reached the living room. His car keys weren't there, neither was his jacket. His watch, usually left on the shelf, was gone too. Her hands shook as she picked up her phone. No messages, no missed calls, just silence. Then she saw it. A white envelope on the kitchen table with her name written in his handwriting. M. Her legs felt weak as she sat down and opened it. The letter inside was short, simple, written with a trembling pen stroke. I don't know how to reach you anymore. Maybe I already lost you before I even realized it. You used to tell me everything. Your fears, your dreams, the smallest things that made you laugh. But now you just say you're fine. I'm not leaving because I stopped loving you. I'm leaving because I can't stand being someone you can't talk to anymore. Her vision blurred. The paper trembled in her hands as she reread the lines again and again. Each word felt like a blade, gentle but final. She stood up suddenly, panic taking over. She ran to the window. His car wasn't in the driveway. She opened the door and stepped outside barefoot, calling his name into the cold morning air. Ethan! Wait! But there was no answer. The street was empty except for the wind rustling through the trees. Her voice broke, echoing back to her in the stillness. She stood there for a long time, her breath visible in the chilly air, her heart refusing to accept what her eyes already knew. He was gone. What if love leaves too quietly for you to notice it's gone? The hours that followed passed like a blur. Emily wandered through the house, touching everything he had left behind. His half-empty mug still sat by the sink. His old jacket still hung in the closet. The faint smell of his cologne lingered in the air. A ghost she couldn't escape. She sank onto the couch, holding the letter to her chest, whispering to herself, he didn't even say goodbye. Her mind replayed every moment of the last few weeks, the quiet meals, the polite smiles, the silence at night. She had told herself they were fine, that love didn't need words to survive. But now she realized silence had slowly taken everything from them. Her eyes landed on the coffee table, where their wedding photo still sat. Him in a dark suit, her in white, both smiling like the world couldn't touch them. She reached for the frame, running her thumb across the glass. "How did we get here?" she whispered. Tears blurred her vision. She tried to stay calm, but the ache was too deep, too real. It wasn't the kind of heartbreak that came from betrayal or anger. It was quieter, the kind that comes from losing someone while still loving them. She picked up her phone, typed his number, and pressed call. The ringing tone felt endless. Then his voicemail played. "Hey, it's Ethan. Leave a message." Her voice broke. "Ethan, please come home. I wasn't pretending. I just didn't know how to say I was scared. I love you. I still love you." She hung up, her hands trembling. The silence that followed was louder than the storm outside. How do you breathe when the person who made you feel alive walks away? The next few days felt unreal. She woke up each morning hoping to hear the door open, to see him standing there, tired, sorry, ready to try again. But it never happened. She tried to keep herself busy. She cleaned, cooked, folded his shirts even though he wasn't there to wear them. Every little thing reminded her of him. The smell of coffee, the sound of rain, the song they used to play while driving. One evening, she found his old sweater at the back of the closet. She sat on the floor, holding it close, the fabric soft against her cheek. It still smelled like him, faint but familiar. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she could almost feel his arms around her. Her mind drifted back to the beginning, the day they met, how he made her laugh without even trying, how he always believed in her when she doubted herself. Those memories used to make her smile. Now they just hurt. She picked up his letter again, reading the same lines she already knew by heart. Each word reminded her of what she had lost, not just him, but the version of herself she was when she was with him. That night, she sat by the window watching the rain fall, whispering to the empty room. "You were wrong. Ethan, I did want you to stay. I was just too afraid to say it." But words spoken too late are like letters never sent. They never reach where they were meant to go. Sometimes closure doesn't come. Sometimes it just hurts until it doesn't. Weeks passed. The days turned into a quiet rhythm of loneliness. Emily learned to exist without expecting his footsteps, without waiting for the sound of his car. She still looked at the door sometimes, but only out of habit. Friends called, asked if she was okay. She said she was fine. The same lie she had told Ethan. But the truth was, she didn't know what fine even meant anymore. One morning, she decided to take a walk through the old park they used to visit. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. She walked the same path they had walked countless times before, past the bench where they'd once talked about their future. She sat down, running her hand over the worn wood. For a moment, she closed her eyes and imagined him sitting beside her, smiling that soft smile that used to make her heart race. Then she opened her eyes, and he wasn't there. A gust of wind swept through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain. She looked up at the sky, tears glistening in her eyes, and whispered, "I hope you found peace, Ethan, even if it's not with me." She sat there for a long time, letting the wind dry her tears. When she finally stood, she felt lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because she had accepted it. That night, she went home, folded his letter carefully, and placed it inside the wedding photo frame. Then she set it on the nightstand. For the first time, she didn't cry when she saw it. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts quiet. The rain outside sounded softer, almost gentle, and then, just as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard it. A soft knock on the door. Her eyes shot open. Her heart started to race. She sat up, holding her breath, listening. Another knock, firmer this time. She stood slowly, every step toward the door feeling like an eternity. Her hands trembled as she reached for the handle. What if it was him? What if Ethan had come back? She turned the knob, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. The door creaked open, and she froze. The porch light flickered. The rain fell quietly, and a dark figure stood just beyond the threshold, holding something in his hand. It was his watch. Her breath caught. He looked at her with tired eyes, water dripping from his hair, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emily, I didn't know where else to go." Her heart skipped a beat. For a second she couldn't speak. Then the tears came again, not from pain this time, but from the sudden rush of everything she had been holding back. She wanted to step forward, to reach for him, to make sure he was really there. But before she could move, lightning flashed, followed by a loud clap of thunder. The lights flickered, and the scene faded to black.